Buenas and mananas y todos. Y mina 36 na legislature Guahan is called to order. We will begin with a prayer and call upon our chaplain, Father Paul Goffigan. Please rise.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Almighty Father of power and mercy, during this season of Advent, we joyfully prepare and anticipate your Son's arrival. Give us the grace to open our hearts in welcome to him through our love and concern for our neighbor. As we open another session in these sacred halls, remove all selfish ambitions from our hearts that hinder us from sharing that love and concern, especially for the poor, the aged, the disabled, and the disenfranchised. Make our preparations for Christmas result in mirroring your Son's unselfish desire to become one like us in all things but sin, and to show us how to be reflections of your love for all of humanity. Hear the prayers of our senators. Grant them wisdom, courage, and integrity during these dark and challenging times. May your light of love permeate their very beings, and may their actions continue to illuminate that love upon our island of Guam. We ask all of this in your Son's name, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
To express a never-ending and never-forgotten gratitude by the people of Guam, the legislature recognizes recipients of Imaladan Mas Takilu na Sacrificio on a display in the Guam Congress building and during each of its sessions. For the recognition of a recipient of Imaladan Mas Takilu na Sacrificio, Senator Joseph Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of a grateful island and country, we honor Sonar Technician Petty Officer Second Class Luis San Nicolas Tenorio and the family of Sonar Technician Petty Officer Second Class Luis San Nicolas Tenorio for making the ultimate sacrifice in service and defense of our island and country.
For the recitation of Inifresi, the Senator Sabina Flores Perez kindly lead us.
Inifresi, Gininimas Takulo, Gi Hinisoku, Imas Takulo, Gi Corazonhu, Zanimas Figo, Naninas Sanyahu, Huafrasin Maisadu, Parabai Huputehi, Zanhu Defendi, Ihinengi, Ikotura, Ilengwahi, Iairi, Ihanam, Zanitano Zamoro, Niren Shaku Duretsu Gininezu Tata, Esti Huafit Magihilo I Biblia, Zanibendrahu, Ibenderen Guahan.
Would Senator Anthony Ada kindly lead us in the singing of the Guam hymn, and Senator Amanda Shelton kindly lead us in the singing of the national anthem. Please be seated. Titus Masipali. Colleagues, I'm informed by our AV that there's some technical difficulties, so we're going to take a 5-minute recess for them to reset this broadcast. 5-minute recess. Bishop. We're back from recess. Our AV issues have been resolved. Thank you for your patience. Madam Clerk, please take the roll call.
Senator Atta, Senator Blas, Senator Brown, Senator Duenas, Senator Moylan, Vice Speaker Munoz Barnes, Senator Nelson, Senator Perez, Senator Rangel, Senator San Augustine, Senator Shelton, Senator Taidagui, Senator Terlahi, Speaker Terlahi, Senator Torres. Madam Speaker, there is a quorum.
Sidus Masi, Madam Clerk. Assistant Majority Leader, Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Buenas. Good morning, Madam Speaker. I move to approve the Legislative Journal dated October 22, 2021.
On that
Subject to corrections. Excuse me.
On that motion to approve the Legislative Journal dated October 22, 2021, subject to corrections, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, there are communications and petitions, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On that motion to append communications and petitions to today's session journal, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, the motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader Shelton, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, there are messages from Imagahagan Guahan, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On that motion to append messages from Imagahagan Guahan to today's session journal, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader Shelton, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, there are reports of standing committees, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion that reports of standing committees be appended to today's session journal, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader Shelton, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, there are no reports of select committees.
Sidus Masi, please proceed.
Madam Speaker, I move that bills introduced, bill numbers 212-36 COR through 216-36 COR, 217-36 LS through 221-36 LS, and 222-36 COR through 227-36 COR, and resolutions introduced, resolution numbers 192-36 COR through 195-36 COR, 196-36 LS through 208-36 LS, and 209-36 COR through 217-36 COR be deemed to have been given their first reading.
On that motion that bills introduced and resolutions introduced be deemed to have been given their first reading, is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader Shelton, you're recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to excuse senators not present for today's legislative session.
On that motion, is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move that all congratulatory, commendatory, and condolence resolutions introduced today and for the remainder of this legislative session be considered first read and adopted, and to allow the Legislative Council to make technical corrections and to add all senators as co-sponsors.
On that motion for congratulatory, commendatory, and condolence resolutions, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader Shelton, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Education, Self-Determination, and Historic Preservation, Infrastructure, Border Safety, Federal and Foreign Affairs, and Maritime Transportation the nomination of David J.N. Camacho to serve as a member, retired teacher representative of the Guam Academy Charter Schools Council with the recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, the motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Education, Self-Determination, and Historic Preservation, Infrastructure, Border Safety, Federal and Foreign Affairs, and Maritime Transportation the nomination of Dr. Lisa Cooper Nurse to serve as a member ED representative of the Guam Commission for Educator Certification with the recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion to place a nomination in the voting file, is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Public Safety, Emergency Response, Military and Veterans Affairs, Mayor's Council, and Public Transit the nomination of Kyle Anthony G. Dahalik to serve as member, Youth Representative of the Guam Regional Transit Authority Board of Directors, with recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Shelton, Assistant Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Sedus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Education, Self-Determination, and Historic Preservation, Infrastructure, Border Safety, Federal and Foreign Affairs, and Maritime Transportation the nomination of Dr. Judith P. Guthards to serve as a member of the Port Authority of Guam Board of Directors with the recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, Culture the nomination of David B. Herrera to serve as a member of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission with a recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Education, Self-Determination, and Historic Preservation, Infrastructure, Border Safety, Federal and Foreign Affairs, and Maritime Transportation the nomination of Philip L. Norey to serve as a member architect representative of the Guam Building Code Council with the recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Legislative Secretary Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedus Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Education, Self-Determination, and Historic Preservation, Infrastructure, Border Safety, Federal and Foreign Affairs, and Maritime Transportation the nomination of Zena S.N. Ruiz to serve as a member Chamorro Culture Alternative Representative to the Guam Historic Preservation Review Board with the recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Environment, Revenue, and Taxation, Labor, Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning the nomination of Edward S. Tovis to serve as a member of the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board with a recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to go back to motions.
On the motion to go back to motions, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're in motion. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place Resolution 210-36 COR. It's relative to reaffirming Guam's right to safeguard cultural resources and to protect ocean ecosystems from environmental harm and exploitive industry interests through a moratorium on seabed mining to ensure the health of Guam's people. Introduced by myself, Senator Sabina Flores Perez, co-sponsored by Speaker Teresa M. Terlahi, Senator Tel Titai Tikwi, and Senator Joanne Brown.
Your motion is to place them where?
In the session agenda after Resolution 200.
After Resolution
200.
200. On that motion, is there any objection? Senator Taitui, is that an objection?
Madam Speaker, I just wanted to find out if this is on the list of resolutions that had the public hearing notice, the open government law, if it was,
Yes, it is.
it was?
On the
Okay.
potential, on the list of potential
On
bills and
potential.
resolutions.
Okay, thank you so
yes.
much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Are there any other motions? Legislative Secretary Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedilus Masi, Madam Speaker. I move to place onto the session agenda the appointment of J.C.T. Bravo to serve as a youth member of the Guam Educational Telecommunications Corporation, KGTF-PBS, Board of Trustees, which was reported out by the Committee on Public Accountability, Human Resources, the Guam Buildup, Hagåtña Revitalization, Regional Affairs, Public Libraries, Telecommunications, and Technology, with the recommendation to do confirm. And for the information of our colleagues, this was also included in that notice for potential items to be moved.
All right, on the motion to place the nomination of J.C.T. Bravo, Guam Educational Telecommunications Corporation, KGTF. Are there any objections? Seeing and hearing no objection, motion carries. Majority Leader, Legislative Secretary Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedilus Masi, Madam Speaker. I also move to place the appointment of Nolan G.T. Flores to serve as a member student representative of the Guam Public Library System Board of Directors, also out of the Committee on Public Accountability, Human Resources, the Guam Buildup, Hagåtña Revitalization, Regional Affairs, Public Libraries, Telecommunications, and Technology onto the session agenda with the recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion to place Nolan G.T. Flores as a member of the Guam Public Library System, are there any objections? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Legislative Secretary Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedilus Masi, Madam Speaker. I also move to place onto the legislative agenda Resolution number 203-36LS as amended by the author, introduced by Vice Speaker Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes, Senators Mary Camacho Torres, Talina Cruz Nelson, Therese M. Terlahi, Amanda L. Shelton, Joe S. San Augustin, Jose Pito Terlahi, James C. Moylan, and V. Anthony Atta, relative to expressing the support of Imina 36 na legislatura in Guahan for the passage of the Build Back Better framework, which would provide needed investments in the community of Guam, including parity for U.S. citizens residing in the territories through supplemental security income inclusion and expansion of Medicaid.
On that motion to place Resolution 203, Senator Taitui, is that an objection?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm looking at the potentials or on the agenda. Maybe I have the wrong listing here, but has that bill met the open government law?
Again, it has. It's been published as a potential resolution.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Speaker, if I may add, to include that in the list of resolutions, so after Resolution 200 on the session agenda.
So that would be after Resolution 210, which was previously added?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so after 210. All right, on that motion, is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place on the session agenda the nomination of Jose U. Muñoz to serve as a member of the Northern Guam Soil and Water Conservation District Board.
That nomination or appointment also has been listed under the potential items and published. Is there any objection to placing the nomination of Jose U. Muñoz as a Northern Guam Soil and Water Conservation District Board member on the session agenda? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place a nomination of Rosalina M. San Nicolas to serve as a member of the Northern Soil and Water Conservation District Board from the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning.
On that motion, is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. Are there any other motions? Hearing and seeing no other motions, we are now in legislative concurrence. Legislative Secretary Shelton, you are recognized. All the motions that we added nominations, we're going to have to now move them in legislative concurrence to the voting file. Again.
Sedis Masi, Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion that all items that were placed on today's legislative agenda be placed into the voting file.
The nominations,
The nominations, yes.
and that's notwithstanding the House rules?
Notwithstanding the House rules, I move that we place all nominations placed on the session agenda this morning into the voting file.
On that motion, to place nominations that have by motion been placed on the session agenda, we're on legislative concurrence and we're now moving that those be placed, notwithstanding the rules, to the voting file. Is there any objection? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. There are no items under consent calendar. So we are now on second reading file. Legislative Secretary Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedis Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place Resolution 153-36LS to the bottom of the resolutions on today's agenda.
On that motion, on the bottom of, just one second. There would be a motion to place resolution number 153-36LS to the after resolution 203 on our session agenda. That's before bill number 73-36. Is there any objection to that motion? Hearing and seeing no objection, motion carries. We're now on resolution 178-36. Colleagues, all items, again, have been uploaded to our drive. They should all be available, as well as potential substitutes are also available on the drive, uploaded by the clerks. If there is any request for hard copies, please let the clerks know, and they will provide you hard copies.
Colleagues, we'll take a moment so that we can print some documents for this resolution we're about to begin. We are in recess. El Legislature in Guahan is back from recess. Speaker Therese Terlahi, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I move to accept Resolution number 178-36LS as substituted on the floor. Resolution 178-36LS as substituted is sponsored by myself and Senators Tina Rose Muller-Barnes, Sabina Flores-Perez, Jose Pito Terlahi, Clinton E. Vigil, Talina Cruz Nelson, Amanda L. Shelton, Joe S. San Augustine, Joanne Brown, Tello T. Taitagui, Mary Camacho Torres, V. Anthony Atta, Frank F. Blas Jr., Christopher M. Duenas, and James C. Moylan. It's a resolution relative to expressing the support of Emina 36 na Legislature in Guahan, the 36th Guam Legislature, for the passage of S. 2798 and H.R. 5338, introduced in the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives on September 22, 2021, which would amend the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act to include Guam as a downwinder of U.S. Pacific test sites, extend the fund claims period, and improve compensation and benefits. The substituted version of Resolution 178-36LS was reviewed by Legislative Council, and we had incorporated their grammar and technical changes in the substitute version. That's really the only changes that have been made. So I'd ask that substitute version be accepted, Madam. And it's been electronically transmitted to the clerks, to our Legislative Council's office, to all senators of the legislature on Thursday, December 2, 2021.
Sitios Masi, Madam Speaker, on the motion to accept Resolution number 178-36LS as substituted on their floor, are there any objections? Motion passes. Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized.
Sitios Masi, Madam Speaker. I move to place Resolution 178-36LS as substituted into the third reading file. I'd like to discuss this.
Please proceed.
Resolution 178-36LS, as substituted, was introduced to express the official support of Emina 36 na Legislature in Guahan and the people of Guam for S2798 and HR 5338. S2798, or the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act Amendments of 2021, was introduced in the U.S. Senate on September 22, 2021 by Senators Mike Crapo and Ben Ray Lujan. In addition to the bill's sponsors, it has 11 co-sponsors as of last Friday. H.R. 5338, also called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act Amendments of 2021, was introduced into the U.S. House of Representatives on September 22, 2021 by Representative Teresa Fernandez. And in addition to Representative Fernandez, the House bill has 61 co-sponsors to date, including our delegate, Honorable Michael F. Cusineclis. Together, S2798 and HR 5338 are the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act Amendments of 2021. And there are many noble and necessary purposes in these two congressional bills, which are practically identical, with some of them serving the people of Guam who have been forgotten for too long in regards to radiation exposure. From 1945 to 1962, the United States conducted nearly 200 atmospheric nuclear weapons development tests in the U.S. and other locations. From 1946 to 1962, the United States detonated 66 nuclear devices in the Marshall Islands. These sites became known as the Pacific Proving Grounds. On October 31, 1952, Operation Ivy was conducted on Elugela Island in the Enewetak Atoll of the Marshall Islands, in which the first true thermonuclear hydrogen bomb, a 10.4 megaton device codenamed Mike, was detonated, destroying that island. Retired U.S. Navy Lieutenant Charles Burt Schreiber, who was stationed in Guam and on duty during the detonation of Ivy Mike in November 1952, recalled in sworn testimony witnessing the Geiger counter measuring off-scale levels of ionizing radiation on the island of Guam. Lieutenant Schreiber even stated, quote, "I panicked. My first thought was that Guam had been subjected to some radioactive dust attack," unquote. Because Guam is located approximately 1,200 miles directly west of the nuclear test sites, our island received radioactive fallout from these tests. Radioactive dust particles traveled through westward flowing jet streams from the Marshall Islands. In addition, ships present in the Marshall Islands during nuclear testing were decontaminated in Guam's harbors with acidic detergents, and the runoff from the operations went directly into the local fishing and reef environments. In 1959, the U.S. Navy performed radioecological studies on the surface water in and around Guam and found a major peak of radioactive contamination. It's also important to note that reports from the Navy made during these times indicate that they did have knowledge of Guam's radioactive exposure, but did not warn or help the people of Guam. In September 2002, Congress mandated Human Resources Services Administration, in accordance with Public Law 107-206, to task the National Research Council, Board on Radiation Effects Research, Division on Earth and Life Studies to conduct a study. Mr. Robert Celestial, Dr. Pablo Guzman, and Dr. Wes Youngberg submitted testimony. The NRC BRER, Division on Earth and Life Studies, concluded in their 2002 report, published report, that Guam qualified as a downwinder under RECA. RECA is the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. The report specifically states that gummed filmed data from 1954 to 1958 shows that Guam did receive radioactive debris from fallout during nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific Ocean. Despite these environmental facts, scientific opinions, and sworn testimonies, and the community efforts led by the Pacific Association of Radiation Survivors, or PARS, Guam continues to not be acknowledged under RECA as a downwinder or area affected by radioactive fallout from the U.S. nuclear testing in the Pacific. This means that those from Guam who were affected by the radioactive fallout are unable to receive the much-needed compensation and benefits that come under RECA. The original Radiation Exposure Compensation Act was enacted by Congress in 1990. It provides one-time cash benefits to certain persons who participated in atomic weapons testing or lived near locations of those atomic weapons testing. Other eligible candidates for RECA include uranium miners, mill workers, and ore transporters. RECA was designed to serve as an expeditious, low-cost alternative to litigation on an individual basis. It also does not require claimants to establish causation. Rather, claimants just have to qualify for compensation. If the amendments within S2798 and HR 5338 pass, downwinder claimants in Guam must establish two things to be eligible under RECA: physical presence in Guam for 1 year from 1946 to 1962, a subsequent diagnosis of a specified compensable disease. The specified compensable diseases after the amendments in these bills would be leukemia, multiple myeloma, lymphoma other than Hodgkin's disease, and primary cancers of the thyroid, male or female breast, esophagus, stomach, pharynx, small intestine, pancreas, bile ducts, gallbladder, salivary gland, urinary bladder, brain, colon, ovary, liver, except if cirrhosis or hepatitis B is indicated, and lung cancer. Overall, S2798 and HR 5338, which wish to amend RECA to, among other things, to extend coverage to claimants in Guam, specifically for the Pacific test sites, to increase RECA downwinder awards from $50,000 to $150,000, to provide coverage for additional forms of cancer, as listed earlier, and to extend the claims filing period for 19 more years, so that those jurisdictions now included would be able to make claims. The public hearing for this Resolution 178-36LS was held on Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. I invited Mr. Robert Celestial, President of the Pacific Association of Radiation Survivors, whose dedication has been pivotal in advancing federal efforts related to Guam's inclusion in RECA, to open the public hearing with a brief history of Guam and RECA. In that history, Mr. Celestial noted how his research and collaboration with individuals like retired U.S. Navy Lieutenant Bert Schreiber uncovered the truth about Guam's exposure to nuclear fallout from U.S. nuclear testing between 1946 and 1962. After Celestial's testimony, many members of PARS and the public came forward to present testimony in support of the two bills and our resolution. Dozens of written testimonies from the community were also submitted prior to the hearing, and these testimonies included tragic personal experiences, complete with cancer diagnoses, financial hardships due to medical treatment, and families left to deal with the aftermath. One of the testifiers, Victoriana Mesa, wife of the late Jose Mesa, who died from stage 4 multiple myeloma cancer and would be eligible for compensation under RICA if the congressional bills pass, talked about how it was common in the 1950s to 1960s Guam to live off the land. I want to share this quote from Ms. Mesa's testimony. Quote, "To know now that all those fruits and vegetables, the local milk, and the meats that my late husband and all the people of Guam were eating and drinking back then were contaminated. And now to witness all these cancer patients' sufferings. I hope and pray that the hearts of the federal government will be so touched and proceed accordingly." And it's not only the physical burdens of nuclear fallout that these victims and families have to deal with, it's the emotional and financial burdens. For instance, testimony from Mr. Rocky M. Limtiaco on behalf of his father, Francisco Cruz Limtiaco, states, quote, as the sole caregiver for my father during his dreadful battle with colon cancer, I had to endure the emotional, financial, and physical hardships of comforting him in this awful state of mind and well-being. Witnessing my father in such an immense and indescribable condition was definitely a very traumatic experience for me and my family. After many round trips from Guam to the Philippines and Arizona, a hospice center in Phoenix, my family had to bear the financial burden of preserving his body in a mortuary until we could fly him back from Arizona to Guam. Over 45 written and oral testimonies were submitted to my office for this public hearing, and my office is still receiving testimony and phone calls from eligible claimants. I believe that even more eligible claimants will come forth if and when Guam is finally included in RICA. Before I close, I want to personally thank Mr. Robert Celestial, PARS president, and the PARS members. Mr. Celestial was one of the veterans from Guam who were stationed in the Pacific Proving Grounds for nuclear cleanup duty. He actually helped rebuild the Runit Dome and was stationed on Lojua Island for post-war debris cleanup. Through the hard work of Mr. Celestial, he was able to bring to light Guam's exposure to nuclear radiation after documents were declassified. All of the information related to radiation exposure in Guam was classified until 1994. Prior to declassification, Mr. Celestial discovered the unclassified documents and pursued the sworn testimony from Lieutenant Schreiber. With the declassified information and his extensive research, Mr. Celestial was able to garner the assistance of then-Senators Angel Santos, Carmen Fernandez, and Mark Forbes to execute the legislature's Blue Ribbon Panel Committee, composed of Mr. Celestial and 11 other citizens on Guam, and chaired by Dr. Chris Paris. This Blue Ribbon Panel was appointed by Speaker Tony Pinco and conducted a research and adopted findings on Guam's exposure to radiation, resulting in a 97-page report, edited by Mr. Will Castro, former senator, and Mr. Sean Briscoe. The 27th Guam Legislature, using the Blue Ribbon Report from the previous term, introduced its first resolution advocating for the inclusion of Guam as a downwinder in RICA. Since that first resolution, the Guam Legislature has introduced similar resolutions in almost every term. Resolution 73-28, introduced by Mark Forbes, BJ Cruz. Resolution 5-29, introduced by Mark Forbes, Tina Rose Munoz Barnes, and V.C. Pangilinan. Adopted in March 2007. Resolution 62-30, introduced by V.C. Pangilinan, Tina Rose Munoz Barnes, Judith T. Wampat. Adopted in June 2009. Resolution 171-31 LS, introduced by V.C. Pangilinan, Tina Rose Munoz Barnes, Judith T. Wampat. Adopted November 2011. Resolution 127-32, introduced by VC Pangilinan, BJ Cruz, TR Munya Barnes, MFQ St. Nicholas. Adopted June 2013. Resolution 39-34, introduced by myself, BJ Cruz, Tom Atta, Dennis Rodriguez, Frank Uggan, Mike St. Nicholas, Talina Nelson, Jolson Augustine, Regine Bisco Lee. Adopted April 2017. Resolution 40-34, introduced by myself, BJ Cruz, Tom Atta, Dennis Rodriguez, Frank B. Uggan, Michael St. Nicholas, Talina Nelson, Jolson Augustine, Regine Bisco Lee. Adopted April 2017. Since the Blue Ribbon Panel, Mr. Celestial has testified in front of the U.S. Senate and continues to work with federal and local officials to continue Guam's fight for inclusion in RICA. Mr. Celestial also founded PARS over 20 years ago, which has brought together many people in our community who are eligible for RICA because of cancer diagnoses, and educated our community about this situation. I sincerely thank Mr. Celestial and all of those mentioned and unmentioned who have contributed to Guam's fight for inclusion within RICA. I also want to mention that on December 5, 2021, PARS published a press release announcing that the House Judiciary for Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties will be holding a markup hearing for H.R. 5338, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act Amendments of 2021, on December 8, 2021 at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This hearing is yet another step forward to get RICA bills to the House floor for a vote and hopefully for its passage during this term. Quote, the House committee has requested letters of support for H.R. 5338, especially from impacted communities. So for any people in the community who are able and willing to submit testimony on behalf of themselves, their family member, or the people of Guam in support of RICA amendments of 2021, please contact Mr. Celestial, President of PARS, or Secretary Kathy Beam. Their number is 688-PARS 7277. Or you can contact my office. With a House markup hearing on December 8, 2021, it only increases the urgency to pass Resolution 178-36 as substituted to put this legislature and the people of Guam's support for the passage of S2798 and HR 5338 on the record. Sizuas Masi, Madam Speaker, and Sizuas Masi to my colleagues and to the people of Guam who have helped us to support this resolution.
Sizuas Masi, Madam Speaker. Is there anyone wishing to speak on resolution number 178-36LS as substituted on the floor? Senator Titlegy, you are recognized.
Sijuos Masi, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak in support of this very important resolution. It's almost to the end of the rope, as they're saying, because next year they're going to address this, and hopefully, Guam's, this resolution will be presented during that time to show the support of our community, a community that's been devastated by almost 70% of these cancers that have been recognized in this resolution have happened on Guam. 70%, Madam Speaker. It's not just the compensation that this resolution will assist those who've had cancer or those who've passed away of cancer, the financial assistance for care and treatment, but it's also the recognition of the disparities of cancer and the lack of health care here on our island for our people who go through these cancers, that they have to be addressed through treatment that cannot be done on Guam, but in the States, and they have to leave their family. There is nothing worse than going through illness such as this far away from home, where you have the support of your family there to get you through this. Guam lacks in this area. And hopefully with this recognition, and that of other places, Madam Speaker, the test sites back in 1945 in New Mexico, for the downwinders of Nevada, northern Arizona, and Utah, were some of the areas too that now in June, I think of 2021, they too are coming to the forefront to address those downwinders and seek some type of remedy or assistance or treatment, but most especially the disparity in that area and the assistance that they need for health care. It's not just about financial at this point when it comes to those who've been affected, who lose their homes, who lose everything they saved in their life savings to beat this terrible, terrible disease. But it also will bring recognition for the government to realize that they need help in these areas to provide the medical treatment, the screening process, preventive care. So I stand in full support of this legislation. I'd like to also thank Mr. Celestial for being a fighter on this and actually advocating other people to come forward. It was when this one person who came to testify who said she's never spoken about it, she had cancer in the early 2000s. It's very difficult to talk about it unless you're talking to someone else who's had it. But to go out and say it in public, it is very difficult. But during that presentation, that public hearing, and those people speaking out, she actually broke her silence and spoke about it. That testimony was very touching, especially to someone like me. So I thank the good author of this resolution to continue the fight of those before her that she recognized on the fight of this terrible disease called cancer. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So to Asmasi, Senator Taitagui, anyone wishing to speak on resolution number 178-36? Senator Perez, followed by Senator Brown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in full support of this resolution 178-36. And I really appreciate the thoroughness of the sponsor for laying out the length that it took, the time that it has taken to get to this point, and all the efforts. And I really want to commend Robert Celestial as well, and all the members of PARS, and some of the founding members who have passed away since. And so I think it would be so great to see these legislation being passed. As you know, RICA was created and signed into law in 1990. That was under President Bush, the first Bush. I do recall back in, that's many years, many decades have passed. And I do wish the success of the legislation before, the congressional bills, that is, as well as this resolution. But I do recall I was in Guam at the time in 2005 when Lieutenant Schreiber came, and he apologized to the people of Guam because he knew that they were being exposed to radiation. And he couldn't warn the people that were collecting water off their roofs for drinking. And he felt very sad that he couldn't warn the people that they were being exposed. And after 50 years, he was able to apologize to the people of Guam. And so his testimony was very critical in the recognition that we were downwinders from the tests in the Marshall Islands. And I recall one of the activists from the Marshall Islands saying that one of those bombs is equal to being bombed by one Hiroshima bomb every day for 12 years. That's the force of those bombs. And they they detonated over 60 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands. And not only that, some of the ships that were used to monitor the Marshall Islands, they came here and they washed them down before they went to San Francisco shipyard, which is a highly toxic, and it's a listed site. And some of the planes they used to monitor, they brought them here and they washed them down here on Guam. And so it's really sad to see that it took this long, but I know, I'm hoping that we do see justice in the passage of these bills. And I know our families were living here at the time. Some of us may have been born at that time. And nuclear radiation doesn't go away. It takes a long time for it to degrade. And so I rise in full support, and I thank all those that have come before us to relentlessly speak out. It takes time for these things to finally come to fruition. And, this resolution shows our resolve, our continued resolve as a people to seek justice. Situas Masi.
Situas Masi, Senator Perez, Senator Brown, you are recognized on resolution number 178-36 as substituted.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak up in support of Resolution 178. I certainly appreciate the efforts of our good speaker, Terlahi, in introducing it, and certainly all our many colleagues that have signed off as co-sponsors. I think we all recognize that this is going to be a positive contribution in moving forward this resolution so that Congress hopefully will include Guam with regards to our people and what our people have gone through. I don't know anyone here who has not been affected by cancer directly themselves or had immediate family members that have suffered from cancer on Guam. And it's not that people in other places don't suffer from cancer or other health-related issues. But as time goes on and you look at the numbers of our people that are affected, you always wonder why, in particular, do we have such a higher percentage of our people that suffer from many of these illnesses, cancer in particular. And cancer is very vicious. It's very vicious. If you're fortunate enough to survive it the first time, hopefully it doesn't come back. And I know that's a fear that many people who've had cancer live with, and certainly for their loved ones that live and experience this with them. Life is challenging as it is, but every opportunity that we have as a people to pursue these issues so that our local people here on Guam, those that live here that were affected during that time period, goodness, from 1946 to 1962, nobody wants to choose to go through this type of suffering. I think that's something we would avoid. Goodness, not like we didn't go through enough challenges with the war, not that we didn't go through enough challenges of all the chemicals and other things that have been put into our water, into our land, and years later we're finding it and concerned about to what degree have we been adversely affected by it. And then also the concern, for those that lived during that time, that's of my parents' generation, my mother's generation, and her older siblings that have been affected by this. And then even the question rises, because I've had those that are from my generation who've suffered from cancer at a very young age, and not knowing the reason as to what the source may have been, and they don't even live on Guam anymore, but are affected by this. And that's a question certainly that probably more research needs to be looked at to address. Is this something that is just of that time period? Is this something that's going to continue many years into the future? Is it something we're all affected by the fact that we live on our beloved island of Guam? A lot of time and effort also as we recognize Mr. Robert Celestial. I remember him my last round in the Guam Legislature. We're talking over 20 years ago, and his continued presence and persistence to bring this issue to light. Many people weren't thinking about it or talking about this issue back then very much. But certainly as the time has gone on, we started to see more and more of our people affected by cancer, and certainly that raises the question as to why. Why have our people been affected in the way and to the large percentage that we have, considering the size of our population here in the Pacific? It's unfortunate, our history and what we've been through, that now hopefully as a community, as a society, we're more conscious about what we do and what impact it's going to have on human health and the environment. But back then, this was not much of a consideration. And unfortunately, it's something many of our neighboring islands in the Pacific, particularly the Marshallese, have experienced and have had to live with and had to suffer the health consequences of it. Money can't heal us. Money can't heal us. It's nice to have, certainly, but it can't heal our physical bodies of what we've been through. But it provides an opportunity to recognize and help and assist those, unfortunately, that have been through this. As Senator Tello had mentioned, You know, many people have to sacrifice tremendously for their health care, even if they have health insurance. A certain percentage of that they still have to pay, and particularly when the care is ongoing, when the follow-up is ongoing, and the follow-up appointments that you have to make over 5 years and then some to address and ensure that if you've become cancer-free, that you are cancer-free and continue to be. And God bless all the people that are. I think that's something we all pray for. So, Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this resolution. I don't doubt our legislature overwhelmingly will vote for the passage, and I'm hopeful that Congress will recognize the impacts that our people have suffered as a result of its nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, and the impact that it's had on surrounding islands within the region all these many years later, that our people are challenged and still, as a result of it, are suffering health issues related to cancer. So with that, Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to comment, and certainly I stand in full support of this resolution.
Sitzus Masi, Senator Brown. On resolution number 178-36 as amended. Speaker Terlahi, would you like to close?
Sitzus Masi to my colleagues for their support of this resolution. Resolution 178-36 as substituted supports Congress's most recent efforts to bring justice, compensation, and benefits to the people in our community and to the veterans who served in Guam. It would put before the House Judiciary Committee this week, on December 8th, Imina 36 na Legislature in Guahan's support on behalf of the people of Guam for the passage of S2798 and HR 5338. I would also like to thank those who advocated for the passage of inclusion of Guam and RICA before me and before this legislature, including Mr. Robert Celestial and founding members of PARS and PARS members past and present. To the late Dr. Chris Paris, the late Senator Angel Santos, the former speakers Ben Pangilinan, Mark Forbes, Judy Wampat, BJ Cruz, all of the people of Guam, cancer survivors who came to testify, and their families, because RICA will also benefit families of those who have passed. Their advocacy and support for the inclusion of Guam into RICA is greatly appreciated, and we will not stop with this resolution to continue to advocate for Guam's inclusion and recognition for the suffering that it has endured. I'm hopeful and optimistic that together we can get this done. And we have the support of our congressmen, our governor, our senators, our community. And it would be life-changing for many in our community who have suffered or who are continuing to suffer from the impacts of radiation exposure. Thank you, Madam Speaker and colleagues, and I move to place Resolution 178-36 LS as substituted on the floor into the third reading file.
On the motion, hearing no objections, motion passes. Speaker Terlahi, you are still recognized. We are now on Resolution 199-36 LS.
Madam Speaker, I move to accept the substituted version of Resolution 199-36 LS on the floor. The substitute is the difference in the substitute and the original version is that the substitute includes advocacy for the adoption of includes S3003. which is a Senate bill. It's a companion bill to H.R. 3967, which the original resolution originally advocated for. So if I could just restate that. So the resolution, as introduced, was for the support of H.R. 3967, and we are substituted to also advocate for the passage of Senate Bill 3003 as companion legislation in the U.S. Congress. And these are to recognize Guam's Agent Orange exposure, advocating for amendments to H.R. 3967 and S. 3003 that reflect the correct dates of Agent Orange use in Guam and veterans' exposure to toxins related to the U.S. military's open-air burn pit activity in Guam. These substituted version and the reasons for the substitution were electronically transmitted to our Legislative Council, to the clerks, and to all senators on Wednesday, November 24th, 2021. So I'd move that the substitute version be adopted.
On the motion to adopt resolution number 199-36 LS as substituted on the floor, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. You are recognized, Speaker Terlahi.
Sizos Masi. I'd like to move that resolution 199-36 LS as substituted on the floor be placed into the third reading file. I'd like to discuss that.
Please proceed.
Agent Orange is a herbicide widely used during the Vietnam War by the U.S. military to eliminate forest cover and crops. The herbicide contains active ingredients in significant amounts of 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorobenzo-P-dioxin, or TCDD, the most dangerous of all dioxins. Human exposure to TCDD has immediate and long-term effects. Recognized diseases related to Agent Orange exposure include chloracne or other acneiform diseases consistent with chloracne, type 2 diabetes, also known as type 2 diabetes mellitus or adult onset diabetes, Hodgkin's disease, multiple myeloma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, acute and subacute peripheral neuropathy, porphyria cutanea tarda, prostate cancer, respiratory cancers, which include cancer of the lung, bronchus, larynx, or trachea, soft tissue sarcomas. The United States federal government continues to deny use of Agent Orange outside of Vietnam and Thailand during the Vietnam War, despite the testimony of many veterans who served in the offshore waters of the Republic of Vietnam between January 1962 and May 1975, known as the Blue Water Veterans, and many Guam veterans, such as the late Leroy Foster, who was afflicted with debilitating diseases and cancers, reportedly as a result of being exposed to the toxic chemicals, who provided sworn testimony that he had sprayed Agent Orange and other toxic chemicals along the entire pipeline from the Sasa Valley Fuel Farm, which runs through civilian villages to Andersen Air Force Base, to Naval Station, while stationed here during the Vietnam War in the 60s through the 70s. In January of 2017, we were encouraged to hear that efforts were underway to test for traces of Agent Orange at sites on Guam historically known to be affected by the sprayed application of herbicides, and that investigations were underway by the Guam EPA to pinpoint any and all areas where herbicides may have been used on island, as well as the visit to Guam by the U.S. GAO to conduct independent review of the U.S. government handling of Agent Orange on Guam in December 2017. In February of 2018, upon learning of upgrades being made to the pipeline, I inquired with Guam EPA whether soil sampling prior to the soil sampling testing prior to the soil being removed or disturbed was made. At that time, I was informed by Guam EPA that a peer review of the Quality Assurance Project Plan was underway, and that although herbicide Orange sampling and testing will occur within the boundaries of Andersen Air Force Base, that the Guam EPA had not overlooked areas located outside the fence and had found reasonable evidence through their investigations to justify off-base sampling. However, in 2018, sampling and testing of herbicide Orange did not take place outside of DoD properties and did not include testing for TCDD. Preliminary soil sampling results of that effort were released in January 2019, indicating the presence of 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T, the primary components of Agent Orange, at non-toxic levels in one sample location. In October 2019, upon the continuous advocacy of Guam veteran Brian Moyer, my office, Guam EPA, a testing effort was conducted as a follow-up to the 2018 testing. Mr. Moyer assisted the Guam EPA and the US EPA Superfund Technical Assessment and Response Team with planning and soil sampling at various locations outside the fence along the Ode Fuel Pipeline. Project scientist Amanda Wagner in the report summary on samples collected at the Tizen Junction location, which yielded higher concentrations of 2,4,5-T and 2,4,5-T than other areas sampled. Quote, "It is probable that TCDD dioxin congener concentrations detected in soils are associated with chlorinated herbicides. Records of chlorinated herbicide use by the military on Guam and veteran affidavits documenting the use of 2,4,5-T and 2,4,5-TP along with data collected from previous soil sampling events suggest the presence and use of chlorinated herbicides was likely. Finally, the herbicides in question were known to contain TCDD. The EPA team stated that they needed to collect more samples to come to a clearer conclusion, but were denied base access for testing. At that time, Guam EPA had stated their intent to write to the Department of Defense to express concerns for the testing results and request on-base access for more testing. Additionally, a 2020 white paper published by the National Veterans Legal Services Program and the Veterans Legal Services Clinic at Yale Law School. Reporting researchers concluded that veterans who served on Guam from 1958 to 1980 were exposed to Agent Orange and other dioxin-containing herbicides. Amongst the researchers spearheading the effort were Guam natives James Campbell, Kyla Essling, and Matthew Lindsley, who were assisted by my office and many others on Guam with locating documents and contacting landowners. The conclusion was made using evidence from official government documents describing widespread practices of herbicide spraying, mishandling, and improper disposal prior to enactment of federal hazardous waste regulations in 1976, and official accounts, empirical studies, and numerous individual affidavits confirming in detail the storage, spraying, and disposal of Agent Orange and other toxic dioxin-containing herbicides in Guam. The report also states that incomplete or destroyed DoD records does not disprove the use of Agent Orange in Guam. There also have been VA, Veterans Affairs, findings in individual cases confirming that veterans who served in Guam were eligible for presumption of exposure. One of these individual cases was Lonnie Kilpatrick. Despite all of this evidence, the United States continues to not recognize Guam's exposure to Agent Orange. Past congressional efforts to federally recognize the island's Agent Orange exposure include H.R. 809, the Fighting for Orange-Stricken Territories in Eastern Regions, the Foster Act, introduced into the 115th Congress, and H.R. 1713, the Lonnie Kilpatrick Central Pacific Herbicide Relief Act, introduced in the 116th Congress. The most recent congressional efforts to federally recognize Guam's Agent Orange can be found in H.R. 3967 and S. 3003 in the 117th Congress, which is the subject of this resolution, is to support those congressional bills. H.R. 3967 was introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives in June 2021 by the Honorable Mark Takano, representative of California. H.R. 3967 is cited as the Honoring Our Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics Act of 2021, or the Honoring Our Pact of 2021. And upon introduction was referred to the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs, and the House Armed Services Committee. H.R. 3967 has 69 co-sponsors, including the Honorable Michael Nicholas, delegate of Guam. And H.R. 3967 has 7 titles whose overall purposes seek improvements to health care and benefits for veterans exposed to toxic substances and for other purposes. S. 3003 was introduced in October 2021 by John Tester of Montana, S3003 is cited as the Comprehensive and Overdue Support for Troops of War Act of 2021, or the Cost of War Act of 2021, and was referred to the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. It has 7 titles whose overall purposes seek to improve health care and benefits for veterans exposed to toxic substances and other purposes. The public hearing for Resolution 199-36LS, the Guam Resolution, was held on Tuesday, November 9, 2021. Together, it was a joint public hearing held by myself and Senator Sabina Flores Perez, oversight of environment. We received written and oral testimonies from longtime advocates like Attorney John Wells, chairman of the Military Veterans Advocacy, Inc., Mr. Brian Moyer, founder and section leader of Agent Orange Survivors of Guam, a section of Military Veterans Advocacy, Inc., and Mr. Robert Celestial Pars, president, and the general public. And these testimonies were replete with scientific evidence, sworn testimonies, and community stories. In the testimonies from the public, they mentioned witnessing the military spraying jungles, living off the land that was sprayed with Agent Orange, and subsequent horrific diagnosis and experiences with chronic diseases and cancers. So many in our community have been diagnosed with chronic disease and cancer, and it's with great hopes that Congress passed H.R. 3967 and S3003 so that those who have been affected by the U.S. military's use of Agent Orange receive the recognition, compensation, and the benefits that they deserve. In addition to Iminatrente Saisna Legislature and Guahan's support for the passage of these 2 bills, Resolution 19936 suggests 2 amendments to the congressional bills. First, at the public hearing, it was Attorney John Wells, the chairperson of the Military Veterans Advocacy, who informed Guam Legislature that since H.R. 3368's publication, a credible document has been discovered in UOG's archives that shows the use of Agent Orange in Guam to have taken place earlier than January 1962. The document was published by the U.S. Navy's Materials Testing and Evaluation Division on August 15, 2018, entitled Guam Soils Conservation Services No. 3, Herbicides. The document explains herbicide uses in Guam, herbicide application rules and styles, and the review of herbicide action on Guam's vegetation. The review of herbicide action on Guam vegetation covers simple inorganic compounds through complex organics, including 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid and 2,4,5-trichlorophenoxyacetic acid, the active ingredients in Agent Orange. Therefore, the Guam Legislature suggests that all dates in H.R. 3368 stating the use of Agent Orange in Guam to have begun on January 1962 be changed to August 1958 to ensure that no veteran affected by the Agent Orange use in Guam be excluded. The second amendment to the bills that the Guam Legislature supports by our resolution is regarding the inclusion of Guam in the presumption of burn pit exposure and benefits coverage. This amendment was drafted with the help of Senator Sabina Perez and her Committee on the Environment. The U.S. military has and continues to utilize open-air burn pits, which is a practice of igniting waste that produces more toxins than burning waste in a controlled environment, and whose exposure has been associated with exposure to particulate matter and dioxins, of which the main dioxin released by burn pits is 2378 TCDD, one of the major toxin byproducts produced by Agent Orange. Despite the U.S. military's continued use of open-air burn pits in Guam, the amendments within H.R. 3967 and S3003 defining covered veterans exposed to burn pit substances, chemicals, and airborne hazards does not include Guam. Because of the U.S. military's continued open-air burn pit practice, the covered veterans amendments within H.R. 3967 and S3003 should include Guam service members' exposure to burn pit substances, chemicals, and airborne hazard. It is suggested then that the amendments within H.R. 3967 and S3003, which expand the burn pit exposure definition of covered veteran, include a veteran who, on or after October 30, 1980, performed active military, naval, or air service while assigned to a duty station in Guam. So with that, I'd like to ask my colleagues for their support of this resolution to seek these benefits for those veterans exposed to these toxins on Guam. Situs Masi.
Situs Masi, Madam Speaker. On Resolution 199-36LS as substituted on the floor. Majority Leader Nelson, you are recognized, followed by Senator Perez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this resolution. I also rise in strong support of the amendments made. We all are aware that in times of war or in times of recovery, especially in a hostile theater environment, that these practices of burning waste and burning rubbish is prevalent. And in most cases, those that are returning from home from the battlefield do automatically receive compensation for their time in that area in the theater. So these are very good amendments, and they are very inclusive in understanding the idea of how the operations are completed. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Sedus Masi, Majority Leader Nelson, Senator Perez.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker. I rise in full support of this amendment, as you know, especially as being one of the co-sponsors. And I think the sponsor of this resolution did such a thorough job. I just, want to support. It's important that we recognize the presumptive coverage, how important that is for those that were present on Guam. So now that we know that there was use or proof that there was use of Agent Orange on Guam, all that has to be shown is that there was coinciding time in which veterans were here. And if they do experience these ailments such as diabetes mellitus, chloracne, there's a list of diseases that are associated with the use of Agent Orange. What this legislation would do, it would facilitate the access to health care, which is so important for our veterans. I'm also in full support of the amendment to also include coverage, presumptive coverage for those who are present on Guam since 1980 to the effects of burn pits. And so we know worldwide that burn pits are a huge problem. We hear about Iraq and Afghanistan, but we also should know that there are also burn pits in the U.S. And it's important that those that have been exposed, our veterans that have been exposed to the toxins that are emitted from these units, that they too are recognized and receive the coverage that is needed. It's also important that we move towards safer technologies ultimately, but that's in another, perhaps another bill, but I rise in full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On Resolution 199-36 LSS substituted on the floor. Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I also rise in support of Resolution 199. I think it's a good thing today that we're here discussing these issues, but unfortunate also that due to the challenges that we've been affected by here on Guam, collectively related to military-based activities, including the previous resolution, certainly would want those individuals that were affected by this, that were veterans that may have served on Guam, that could have been exposed to Agent Orange, that they could be included so that the health issues and challenges that they've been affected by could be addressed. I think it's very unfortunate that the member of the military here, that's Mr. Kilpatrick, that's identified, had gone through all these challenges to try to get recognized for the health issues that he was facing as a result of exposure to Agent Orange, ended up dying such a short time, within less than a month of when he was finally recognized to get the benefits that he so desperately needed to address the health issues that he was affected by. Collectively in our history, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate since World War II. It's unfortunate since the practices of our military presence on Guam, that these issues that have affected our people, so many years later, we're having to fight for the recognition so that the health issues that have been affected currently of those veterans that are still here with us, but even more importantly, those that have probably since passed away as a result of some of these health-related issues. It's just such a concern. I had the opportunity for 14 years to serve on the Restoration Advisory Board for Andersen Air Force Base as a community member. to be engaged directly and involved with the military on addressing the cleanup of numerous sites on Guam, particularly the priority of why Anderson Air Force Base was placed on the national priorities listing, and funding was put in place also to address the mitigation or cleanup of a number of these sites. So just the practices of the old days of simply using these type of chemicals without even thinking what the physical impacts could be to one's health or to the community in which these chemicals were being applied, or how they addressed disposal of it. You know, driving it over a cliff and dumping it was very common. Dumping it in the ocean was very common. Digging trenches up in northern Guam into our limestone and discharging and dumping and covering and burying this material was very common. Sometimes simply abandoning these barrels out in the open exposure without any thought whatsoever to what the impacts would be to our community, to ultimately our drinking water, and even as important, the health and welfare of our people here. You know, I myself, because my father's a combat veteran who served in Vietnam, and my dad, as a number of our people here on Guam, those that have served, you know, was determined ultimately 100% disabled as a result of his health issues in his service to the United States of America. So certainly families that have been affected by this understand. You understand the challenges that someone who has health issues related to this are affected by, and the impact that they have to suffer while they live with these challenges, and they live with them until they die. So certainly every effort that we could put forth for our veterans, be they served here on Guam, Vietnam, Iraq, I mean, the list goes on. We certainly want to make sure every effort can be put forth to appease in any way we can the physical health impacts that they're suffering. And many of them, as they get older, I mean, we are just in the normal course of aging, you have your own list of challenges. And then on top of this, you have the other physical impacts that you have to go through because of exposure. I certainly recognize, again, the efforts of our speaker in pursuing this, her very persistence in pursuing this to make sure that when many, including, you know, the federal government was very quick to dismiss and say, oh, you know, there are people there and our soldiers there were not affected by this, to continue to be persistent to pursue this. Because I remember a number of years ago, I was not in the legislature, but I remember watching the news stories of the efforts that she had to pursue this issue. And now, you know, the opportunities here and before us for the federal government to acknowledge its participation with regards to Agent Orange exposure here on Guam. Again, you know, the impacts are ferocious to your health and your well-being. And once you've been exposed, there's very little you can do other than try and manage the effects that these type of chemicals have on your body, especially as you're aging. So I certainly thank our good speaker. I thank everyone. I know our colleagues and pretty much unanimously have co-sponsored this resolution. I think it sends a collective voice to the federal government on where we stand with these issues. I certainly hope moving forward that as we are more conscientious as a community and as a society and as a people worldwide, that we treat our earth better, our island better, because, you know, to what is poured into, dumped, thrown away, ultimately we find that we are affected. It comes back to haunt us. It comes back to affect our very health and well-being as individuals and as a community. So with that, Madam Speaker, I certainly stand in full support of Resolution 199. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much, Senator Brown. On Resolution 199-36 as substituted on the floor, Speaker Terlahi, you may close.
Again, I want to thank all of my colleagues for their unanimous co-sponsoring of this important piece of legislation. I want to thank those veteran advocates who have for years, even prior to this term, for years, testified over and over in front of the VA, in front of the Guam Legislature, in front of Congress as to their use of herbicides on Guam, their strong belief that that was Agent Orange because of the markings on the container and other factors that they have testified to. For the resident advocates as well, residents of Guam who have advocated based on their witnessing their families' involvement as civil service employees as to herbicide use on Guam. It's with their advice and assistance that we have all been able to put forth the efforts that we have in regards to getting Guam's Agent Orange exposure recognized and getting justice for those affected by it. I want to thank the public for submitting testimony to my office and for those who were able to present at the public hearing to tell us their stories and to provide faces to these tragic stories so that we can provide to Congress faces to the effects of Agent Orange on Guam. Again, Sizos Maasi, Madam Speaker, and I move to place Resolution 199-36LS as substituted on the floor into the third reading file.
On the motion to place 199-36LS as substituted on the floor into the voting file, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion passes. Majority Leader Nelson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to request a quick recess.
We are in recess. El Legislature in Guahan is back from recess. Majority Leader Nelson, you are recognized.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to make a motion that we recess till 2 o'clock. I'm sure you can give reason.
Yes, thank you very much, Majority Leader. We will be taking a recess until 2 o'clock for lunch. We will also be having the session hall assessed for some air quality issues. So we have some technicians here who are checking the session hall, so we'll give them time to do that as well. So Duas Masi, and we are in recess.